Long before white men settled in this region, Native Americans lived on the banks of a wild and untamed river. French traders in the late 1700s called them the Republican Pawnee, and it's from this tribe that the river takes its name. The Republican River Valley was once home to one of the largest concentrations of buffalo on the Great Plains. The river was mentioned in journals by Lewis and Clark in 1804 and by William F. Cody in 1859. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Willa Cather grew up on the banks of the Republican near Red Cloud, Nebraska during the 1880s. The river had a dangerous reputation. Killing floods were documented through the late 1800s and into the next century. In the spring of 1935, the river raged through the Republican Basin, killing over 100 people. It devastated communities along the way. By 1956, Harlan County Dam was complete, and construction on other dams and diversions was underway to control floodwaters and provide irrigation for farming in the basin. Although the Republican River recognizes no ownership, 3 states lay claim to the waters that flow within it. It begins life on the high plains of Colorado, where the headwaters from 2 channels travel into Kansas and southwest Nebraska. The North Fork Channel converges with Colorado's Arickaree River, then joins with the South Fork. The mingled waters become the Republican River that travels eastward along the invisible boundary that separates Nebraska from Kansas. At Superior, the river flows into Kansas, where it joins the Smoky Hill River to form the Kansas River. The river continues on until it reaches the muddy waters of what was once the longest river in the United States, the Missouri.
Basically, the Republican Basin is a very large basin, and it's somewhat complex too in the nature of it. The majority of the water that ends up in the Republican River itself comes from runoff. So we're extremely reliant upon Mother Nature. There's a lot of difference from the eastern end of the basin to the western end of the basin.
The water coming in from Colorado and North Fork of the Republican is very minimal right now. It runs to about Binkelman, maybe to Max, Nebraska, and then the river is dry right now. And the South Republican that comes out of Colorado through Kansas and into Nebraska is completely dry, and it hasn't run water for years. I don't know how many years, but it's been a long time.
When you get down on the eastern end of the Republican, we have a number of very good tributaries that do run pretty consistently year-round.
A number of conservation practices have been implemented along the Republican Basin, including no-till farming, contour farming, and terracing.
Water conservation is a very good thing, but it does intercept the water before it gets to the river. In 2007, actually February 2007, we were flying west, and they were having a good snow melt in western Kansas, and we noticed the miles and miles and miles of terraces in northwest Kansas. And it just brought to our attention that this soil and water conservation practices, they've really done a super job of it there in northwest Kansas. But the thing that's the problem with it, it's over 2 million acres of drainage that's designed to drain into Harlan Reservoir.
There is a considerable amount of water, though, that does get into the Republican from base flow, and that's underground water that will eventually end up in a stream.
Beneath the surface of the Republican River Basin lies the High Plains Aquifer, commonly known as the Ogallala Aquifer. The intimate connection between groundwater and surface water in Nebraska has become a very contentious issue. In 1943, Congress ratified the Republican River Compact, which regulated the amount of water that users in Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska could utilize. The compact specified virgin water supply, or undepleted water in the basin. Each of the 3 states is allocated a percentage of the virgin water supply: Colorado 11%, Kansas 40%, and Nebraska 49%. In 1998, Kansas filed suit in the U.S. Supreme Court alleging that Colorado and Nebraska violated the compact by using more than their respective shares of the Republican River water supply.
We signed an agreement in early 2002 that said that we would comply with this compact and really monitor our water use. One of the things when you talk about being in compliance with the compact and the use of your water, that is not scientific enough that everyone can agree exactly on the amount of water available and the amount of water that's been used by any of the 3 states. So there's possibility for disagreement and the necessity for arbitration. I looked at the Platte River and the Republican River, and as a boy growing up near the Platte River, I remember on Highway 183 when my family and I would go into Elm Creek, we could cross that bridge and look both ways and it was sand and water. And as I've talked to people on the Republican, that used to be the way the Republican was.
The natural scouring process that once occurred on rivers like the Platte and Republican has been reduced by lack of flow down these rivers. Vegetation has grown on the banks and on the islands that have formed in the channels. The capacity for flow has been reduced in the lower Republican, and pinch points caused by siltation, vegetation, and debris created flooding near Franklin. In an effort to comply with the compact, releases of water from the reservoir have caused problems in the past.
We did that as a result of building dams for flood control, for irrigation, for recreation. And so it's our doing that enabled the vegetation to get to where it is today, and really nothing has been done to this point for about 60 or 70 years. And so we're looking at the result of a long period of time in letting vegetation take over. And we need to do something about it.
A drought that began in 2001 intensified the problems on the Republican. While native vegetation was getting a foothold in the channels, soon some aggressive non-native plant species began to infest the waters. Not only were the channels of the river being affected, but the man-made reservoirs along the basin were losing their battle against the new species of plants.
Several senators came together and felt that there was a need to try and improve river flows associated with a compact that Nebraska has with the state of Kansas. The groups involved with the Republican River projects are the Twin Valley Weed Management Area, which takes over the section from Harlan County Reservoir down to the Kansas line, and then the Southwest Weed Management Area, which encompasses from Harlan Reservoir to the Colorado line.
When we got started in 2004, of course our primary objective was to go after funding to address our noxious weed concerns. And our big weed concern at that time in 2004 was up on Harlan County Dam. The lake level was 20 foot below normal pool level, and around the perimeter of the lake you had a tremendous amount of exposed shoreline, and this shoreline was just growing up to a tremendous infestation of salt cedar and Phragmites, along with willows and cottonwoods as well.
According to the USDA, salt cedar, or tamarix, has infested more than 1 million acres along the country's western rivers and streams. As water levels on rivers and reservoirs decrease, the seeds germinate in what is often called the bathtub ring effect.
Without the grant that we were provided from the state of Nebraska, it would have been impossible to try to treat or do anything with this salt cedar. It just was a losing battle because of its explosive growth rate and the way that it grows and growth pattern. We were able to treat it for a few years in ground application, but it soon got to a point where it was so thick and tall that we couldn't even drive a four-wheeler. So the only option at that point was to go with a helicopter and use the Habitat herbicide. And of course the expense of doing that was such that it really wasn't feasible for us to do that within our own means.
Other invasive plants identified along the Republican Basin are red cedar, Russian olive trees, and Phragmites. Phragmites, which is a grass species, is a serious concern on Nebraska rivers. Phragmites, or common reed, spreads quickly along creeks, streams, marshes, floodplains, and lake shores. It has been seen in all 48 mainland states. Phragmites is a naturally occurring plant in North America. However, this species is an aggressive European breed that quickly becomes a monoculture. It has no natural enemies and promotes sediment deposits with its thick, deep root masses clogging river and stream channels. It reproduces through rhizomes and stolons, as well as seeds from thick plumes that form in the fall. In August of 2007, Phragmites was designated a noxious weed in Nebraska.
From the ground, you cannot really visualize the problem that you have as far as debris within the river channel. We could not imagine or visualize the amount of Phragmites that was actually on this river system until you do get up in the air and just fly down this river. It was just amazing, all the debris that was strewn up and down the river, the log jams that existed, the patches of Phragmites. When we flew this thing, it was in spring of 2007, and there was a lot of Phragmites in that time. However, by the time they got ready to spray it in that fall, the Phragmites grows so rapidly that by fall time it had increased tenfold on this river system.
The funding from legislation for the restoration of the Republican River came into place in June of 2007. The work would be confined to within the river channel to eradicate noxious weeds and remove debris to allow the water to flow down the river. It would be necessary for the two groups on the Republican to fast-track their projects. The projects would include chemical application and mechanical removal of trees and debris. The following spring, a 2-mile test area on the lower end of the river would be deep disked to break up root mass. The project would be a massive undertaking, and no one knew for sure if it would restore the flow on the Republican River.
One of the big pluses of the success of this project was getting our landowners initially involved, informed, and on board on this whole project right from the very start. We did not tell them what we wanted to do. We asked them what they would like to see done, and we very much obliged with what they were requesting. Originally, we had a tremendous amount of concern of spraying the chemical by helicopter. Landowners were very concerned with the drift problems. There's a number of landowners up and down here that had just planted alfalfa or some other crop, and they were concerned about the drift from this herbicide. A number of the landowners that had seen the helicopter pilot spraying from bridges or other areas, they were so impressed with the placement of the herbicide that they did call us and say, hey, let them go ahead and spray next to them. So we had practically everybody up and down the river go with the spraying, other than just the one landowner that would not allow us on at all.
In the case of the Republican, they wanted to open that channel up so that they could move water through there. Their concern was, as vegetation grows in on the channels of that river, if they get high water, then it impedes water flow and they can't move enough water and they get flooding. And so what they want to do is go in, open those channels up, remove the drag that vegetation creates when they have high water, and they can move the kind of water volume that they need to.
The large islands that have existed within this river channel for the past 20-25 years, it's got the large tree growth. We did not touch those islands. We maintained them basically because of the landowners indicating that they wanted to keep those islands intact for wildlife purposes. There's a tremendous amount of hunting up and down the river here, and they wanted to keep the trees and all intact on those islands for wildlife concerns.
Most of your perennial species with herbicide applications respond best later in the year, so late summer to early fall. And what happens when a plant starts to shut down in the fall, it takes all the nutrients and reserves from the top growth and puts it into the root system for storage. An application, whether it be handgun or aerial application with Habitat will give you a highly effective control of that Phragmites, 90% plus, 95% plus when done correctly. And so it gives you a minimum amount of cleanup to come back in. You come back in on a monitoring program and do a couple of follow-up treatments in years to come, and you can effectively control it.
In the spring of 2008, it became evident that the initial work on the Republican River was showing signs of success. Trees and vegetation outside the river channel began to green up, but the skeletons of Phragmites and other invasive vegetation that remained within the channel were a dramatic reminder of what had occurred the previous fall. The aerial application of herbicide had done its job. Cross-sections of islands that had been chosen for deep disking were done to determine their height at the beginning of the season. These cross-sections would then be repeated at the same points in the fall after the high water releases flowed over the islands during the irrigation season. The elevation differences of the survey could give an indication of the amount of scouring and wearing away of the islands that would occur over the course of the summer. As the deep disking began, the root mass left behind began to disappear under the sands of the islands that had been chosen for the test. Extensive debris removal began on 140 miles of the Republican River Channel, from the diversion dam at Cambridge to the Kansas-Nebraska state line. Along with an overabundance of vegetation, log jams and large trees were impeding the flow of water to Kansas. It was hoped that clearing the channel would help move water without causing flooding at pinch points along the way. Work on the eastern end of the Republican River continued through the spring of 2008. The difficult task of accessing the river with large equipment proved to be a challenge. Removal of debris would continue as long as the levels in the river were low enough. The deep disking of the test area was completed, and another area was chosen for a controlled burn. The remainder of the banks and islands would be allowed to scour naturally, if that was possible. All that was needed now was sufficient rainfall and water supply. Soon, the Army Corps of Engineers at Harlan County Dam would release water into the river. Would it be enough to scour away the dead vegetation and root mass? Would a significant release of water once again cause flooding at Franklin? This type of extensive reclamation had never been done on a Nebraska river. No one knew for sure what the outcome would be. The spring of 2008 brought an increase in rainfall along the Republican River Basin. For the first time in years, abundant water flowed down the Republican River. In June, the reservoir reached 1,948 feet, which is 2 feet above normal pool level.
When you have a goal, you need to have some form of measuring whether or not you've attained that goal. Early 2008, from Harlan County Lake, they released 750 cubic feet per second. This was before irrigation, and so on the way down the stream, tributaries contributed additionally, but there was not vegetation to take up the water, And so by the time we got to the last gauge at Guide Rock, before the diversion canal takes water down into Kansas, it read 1,000 cubic feet per second. In earlier years, when we tried to deliver water to Kansas and released it from Harlan County Lake, it flooded at 250 to 300 cubic feet per second at Franklin. And this was a real problem. We had to be able to increase the capacity to deliver water to Kansas. We've done that.
The timely precipitation not only aided in the efforts to deliver water to Kansas, but it also was instrumental in determining what the next step would be in managing vegetation. The islands that were allowed to scour naturally did not do so effectively. Also, the controlled burn had little effect on the deep root structure left behind by Phragmites and other invasive vegetation.
Right now we are at the very end of the area that we did double disc here this past spring. And as you can see, the area that we have here is it's free of vegetation right now. We had a meandering river all summer long occurring through here. It was scoured off. We do not have the root mass to contend with. The river did an excellent job of scouring this island off to sand. Behind us, of course, this is the area that was not disked. It was sprayed, however. But of course, the growth that's coming back are basically annuals. It consists of barnyard grass, some reed canary grass. And what possibly could occur now is if we do not get continue high water here in the next few years, there's a very good chance that this could return to what it was several years ago, in which the islands will start to build up again, continue to build up, and your plant growth will then continue to grow, and you'll get more vegetation, a lot taller vegetation, and it'll just continue to the islands will continue to grow and thus impede our water flow.
During the summer of 2008, the flow of water removed an average of 12 inches from the islands that had been disked. Members of Twin Valley Weed Management have determined that double disking the remainder of the islands is necessary. One of the goals of Legislative Bill 701 was to save water by removing noxious and invasive plants along the riparian corridor. The problems that existed in the southwest portion of the Republican River Basin included salt cedar and a significant infestation of Russian olive trees. As the fall of 2008 drew to a close, it was apparent that the upper Republican River was undergoing dramatic changes.
In this particular area, we saw Russian olive populations of over 425 mature trees an acre. And you take a tree like this one single Russian olive, this tree can transpirate over 200 gallons of water a day during the growing season. And you figure there was 25,000 of these trees in this plot. So just a tremendous amount of water just in this one 60-acre plot. And you start to figure mile after mile of the river. The Southwest Weed Management area, we took out about 2,000 acres of this thick timber up and down the river. So you start to put pencil to paper and figure out the potential water savings. It's immense.
Water is the lifeblood of the Republican Basin, but it's also the lifeblood of all of Nebraska. One of our objectives was to save water. And this is really important because it affects our ability to be in compliance in our compact with Kansas. In 2008, by reading river flows into Nebraska from Colorado, and by reading gauges at Swanson Reservoir in western Nebraska, through the removal of Russian olive and salt cedar, I believe that we added 14,000 acre-feet to Swanson Reservoir for 2009. And by taking plant counts of Phragmites, cottonwood, salt cedar in the lake bed of Harlan County Lake, as well as along the stream, and making estimates of how much per day each one of those plants may have taken, I'm comfortable with an estimate that in 2008, we saved around 40,000 acre-feet of water from Harlan County Lake to the Kansas line. When we put that savings together with an estimated savings in Swanson Reservoir, we may have saved somewhere near 55 to 60,000 acre-feet of water.
In 2009, landowners along the lower Republican River were able to take advantage of an abundant water supply from Harlan County Lake. And, for the first time in years, water was released from Swanson Reservoir for irrigation on the western portion of the Republican River.
It's just been a really an amazing experience to be able to work with groups like the Twin Valleys Weed Management Area, the other weed management areas in Nebraska, the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, the Nebraska Environmental Trust. All of those groups and various others that I haven't mentioned, they all realize that we have to work together to do this, and it's just been a real joy to have people on the same page that share a common goal.
The formation of partnerships with landowners, as well as other agencies, both state and federal, will be ongoing. Because of these partnerships, the possibility of additional funding is likely to continue the work of island disking and debris removal on the lower Republican and removal of noxious and invasive plants on the upper portion of the river. The involvement of others is crucial to the riparian restoration and the maintenance of this Nebraska waterway.
Well, I'd love to see the 3 states again work together on not only vegetation management, but on projects that can take care of the high and low peaks due to drought, due to excess rainfall, as we did when we put in the dam projects. It is a river that flows through 3 states, and it is a benefit to all 3 states.
Rivers are continually evolving due to changes in their environment, both natural and man-made. Man has changed the texture of the land, but man too is a part of nature. No one can predict what the future holds for the Republican River, but as groups along the basin continue their work to effect positive changes, one thing is clear. Only by working together can we reclaim our rivers for future generations.